The next session, and I'm just going to introduce them. You can read their bio here. So I'm giving y'all like an extra 5 minutes because I know each of these sessions are all-day sessions, and we're just taking 30 minutes or so with each one just to whet your appetite and to know who you can reach out to. But the next session by Reverends Kirk and Stephanie Clawson, they're with Missionaries of Hope. They work in bringing liberation and rescue to those that are in the sex industry in the Houston area, as does one of our other missionaries who will be speaking. But Kirk and Stephanie are going to deal with the dangers of and the myths of pornography. So let's welcome Kirk and Stephanie Clawson. So now you have 35 minutes. God bless you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to hold this. I work better kind of walking around. So it's early this morning, and obviously the subjects that we're going to be talking about this morning, they're not a laughing matter, but I kind of found it a little comedic that we're the first speakers and we're talking about pornography. So I'm like, get your donuts, get your coffee, and let's talk about pornography. So it's a little odd where you're like, hi, good morning, you don't know me, but we're going to be talking about some really intimate things this morning. And but we talk about these things to bring awareness and education. So one thing that we realized through our church, so we go to Dominion Church in Dickinson, is that when our pastor speaks about things from the pulpit, it seems to be kind of a green light for those conversations to happen amongst the church. So when you have pastors that refuse to talk about things, then you have a congregation that refuses to deal with things. So we're going to just talk. Well, he's going to start, and I'll let him go, but I'll talk, and then he'll talk. So good morning again, and I'm just blessed and honored to be here.
All right. So as Stephanie told you, this is an interesting ministry lane that God has chosen to place us in. It's not something we would have chosen for ourselves, that's for sure. And we're just happy and honored to be here this morning. Thank you, Reverend Don, for responding to the Holy Spirit, as your packet says, or as this packet says. 2 years ago, a movement began in your heart, and you have responded and you have listened. Thank you to everyone that has been a part of making this happen this morning. So I'm Kirk, this is Stephanie, and I promise we are really joyful and lighthearted people who are slightly sarcastic and like to joke. But this is a very serious subject, and it is one that we feel is important to open up and talk about within the church walls, because these issues are happening outside the church walls. Therefore, we need to be talking about them within the church walls. And so again, thank you, and I'm going to pass the microphone to Stephanie, and here we go. We just thought, what kind of way can we present this information that won't be so somber and serious and feeling like it's going to beat people down? So we thought we'd make some slides, and we thought we would just try to do like a Mythbusters theme. So here we are.
So good morning again. And so one of the things that we let me back up a little bit. So we go and we speak at a lot of different churches. We come into contact with a lot of different people. And when they ask us, oh, what do you guys do? What is your ministry? So a lot of what we do, or where we find the lane that we're in, is that we talk to people a lot about freedom and restoration. When we first started in ministry, we did a lot of outreach and intervention to women who were trafficked on the street or trafficked in an illicit massage parlor. But then we kind of had this thing where the Lord was putting on our heart is, like, what if we reached the women before they made it to the street? And then also when you kind of look at trafficking, it's a supply and demand issue. So then it's like, okay, so we're reaching the supply, but who's reaching the demand? And then you kind of think, where is this demand coming from? What is fueling the demand to where hundreds and thousands of men every day, every year are purchasing someone for sex? So you kind of think, like, I know they didn't just wake up one day and decide, oh, I'm going to wake up today and I'm going to go drive and I'm going to go find a woman standing on the side of the street and purchase her and exploit her. There's a process that happens for them to get to that point. And what we found through lots of reading, lots of training, and a lot of just kind of looking into it ourselves, is what we found is that pornography directly fuels the demand for sex trafficking. And that might be hard to understand, or maybe you don't understand, but so we're going to walk you through a couple of things that we've heard through just casual conversations we've had with people about pornography. And so a lot of people have their opinions, and a lot of people have kind of what they believe pornography is or what they believe it's not. So we're going to kind of touch on about 5 myths surrounding pornography. So one of the first myths that we heard a lot is personal viewing doesn't hurt anybody. We hear it all the time where people say, well, I mean, if I'm just watching it by myself, that doesn't do anything, that doesn't hurt anybody. But that, in fact, is very false. The reason why it's false is it causes divorce. So if you're married and your spouse is actively viewing pornography, statistics say 56% of divorces involve one party actively viewing pornography. 47% of families say pornography is a problem in their home. So when we talk about pornography, it's not necessarily just men viewing. That seems to be kind of what a lot of people think, but also women view as well. It also hurts the brain chemistry that is going on in your brain. So our brain responds to viewing pornography the same way as when a heroin addict takes a hit. It engages the reward center of your brain by releasing large amounts of dopamine. And with such large amounts of dopamine comes new nerve pathways that are being formed in your brain. These mentally connect us to what we're viewing or consuming. A lot of people say, how can you be addicted to pornography? Because people say addiction is something that you're like taking in. But what you don't realize is constant consumption of something, even through viewing, starts rewiring your brain to where it actually changes the genetic makeup of your brain, because it's connecting different neurons that are connecting different pathways. So you're starting to reprogram your brain. You're starting to desensitize your brain, right? And that's what starts the addiction process happening. It says these new connections create memories that make it easier to return to pornography, which starts building tolerance, and that's why you need to view more, and that's why sometimes the viewing becomes more vile or more violent, because it's an escalation process that happens. We'll talk about our bodies. So body image, pornography starts creating a negative body image. When women view pornography, they start comparing themselves. This woman looks like this, I don't look like that. Actually, in the last 10 years, statistics show that the amount of plastic surgery in women has skyrocketed. Plastic surgery that has never been going on in the past, of body parts that are being altered to look differently and look more appealing. So you kind of think, where is that coming from? Why are women thinking that they need to change themselves so much? In 1945, only 3% of men under the age of 30 were diagnosed with erectile dysfunction. Now what's coming out is something called porn-induced erectile dysfunction. So we'll skip ahead. So that was 1945, only 3%. And those were normally probably medically, like there was some kind of medical issue that was going on. In 2011, 33% of men under the age of 30, it's because of these chemicals that are changing the makeup in your brain. It's making you more dependent on the arousal from pornography than the arousal from an actual person. So people are finding not only is the genetic makeup of their brain being altered, but now the way that your body functions because of what you're viewing. So men are going online and buying medicine. Men are going to the corner stores and buying medicine because they're finding it's more difficult to be aroused by perhaps your spouse or perhaps who you're with because of this different neuron connections and different nerve connections that you've created in your brain due to the over or the excess amount of pornography that you're viewing. So that's one myth that we've heard, because we've heard people say, oh, if I watch it at my home by myself, it doesn't do anything. Well, I've just kind of given you a basic overview that, yes, it does hurt. It hurts people that you're connected with. It hurts yourself. It hurts your mind. It hurts your physical body. And obviously, it's connected to our spirit as well. So myth number 2 that we have is pornography is a healthy sexual education tool. Like, we've actually heard parents tell us, it's fine that my 14-year-old son watches pornography. It just, teaches them, how to interact with people. I can't ever think of how pornography would teach you how to have appropriate relationships with people. I know we've heard jokes about, like, there was a TV show that was on, I don't know if you guys watch Friends, but we watch Friends, and there was a joke about Joey and pornography, and he said, the one thing I realized about pornography is that when a pizza guy comes to, or pizza person comes to the door, they're just there to deliver pizza. That's it, but pornography taught me something different. And that's what it is. It's because pornography teaches you, it has this expectation that is not real at all. And so you have kids who are very impressionable with very young minds that are consuming large amounts of pornography, and they think this is how they approach a woman. A girl viewing it thinks this is how she's supposed to act around a young man. And so we have this huge generation of young people who have no idea how to interact with each other, have no idea how to pursue one another with dating in a healthy way, because they're watching something and they're thinking, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. These are the words I'm supposed to say. These are the actions I'm supposed to take against this person. And it's all very false. So that was one of them. So the average age of first exposure to pornography is 10 years old. Now, this is average, which means there's much younger and older. A lot of these is by accident. So a lot of this is your child could search something on the internet and it could pull up something. This could be, I see it and I show my friend. And so we have a lot of that going on. We have a 16-year-old daughter, and she rides the school bus to school, and she's told me on numerous occasions that there's boys on the school bus watching pornography on the way to school, on the school bus going to high school. I know a lot of you fly or travel. I have walked through airports, and I see men walking down the terminal watching pornography on their phone. I've sat behind men on an airplane and looked between the seats, and he's watching pornography leaned up against the window in the airplane. It's become so normalized because we're being so desensitized to it. And so now we are wondering, like, how are my kids being exposed to it? Well, you can just sit next to somebody in a public place and be exposed to it. Pornography fuels violence. And a lot of people, I think a lot of people, especially the older generation, their sense of pornography is like Playboy, right? So Playboy came out a lot of years ago, and I did it's so bad that my research is I did a little research on Playboy, and you don't get to say that often in church, and found some really interesting statistics about Playboy. It actually was pretty interesting, and but people think that that's what pornography is, but pornography isn't like that anymore. It's not a magazine that's underneath your dad's bed or hid in the bathroom anymore. That is not what's happening. This is very violent, very aggressive, and very demeaning types of pornography that people are searching for. The most searched on the internet right now is teen, rape, and bondage. That is what people are searching for. That is not healthy. That is not a healthy sexual education tool that you would want your children to view. And so this is what's being searched, right? And then we go back to the neuron pathways being reformed, and then now this is what people are taking in. So what happens is that it dehumanizes the submission into being normal. So we think this is normal. This is how relationships are. This is how I'm supposed to act in a relationship, and that's not at all true. It's a false portrayal of enjoyment. But I think if the most searched is rape and bondage, I can't see how enjoyment can be put into that same sentence. Violence, sexual arousal, people are being aroused by this violence. So with that kind of violent pornography, people who view it on a constant basis are 6 times more likely to commit rape. So then going back, is pornography really a healthy sexual education tool? I can't think that. I think just the old-fashioned, let's sit down and have a conversation about this. I think that's the best education tool. Open conversations. We have a lot of conversations with parents about, like, well, I don't know how to talk to, like, how do you start the conversation? I'm going to tell you, it's awkward. It's embarrassing. You're going to blush. You're not going to make eye contact, and you might laugh a little bit through it. But I'm telling you, if you sit down with your children and you say, we need to talk, and they're going, oh, I don't know, because we have 2 older sons, and we've had to sit down and go, listen, I'm embarrassed. You're embarrassed, but we're going to talk about this. And we've had really great conversations even with our sons, and they've asked really healthy questions about relationships and about the expectations, because we use real words. We use real information, and how we've begun talking to our sons, or even our daughter, is that we use a lot of science to back up, because we're finding this generation, if you hit them with well, you know what Jesus says, oftentimes they kind of go, and then there's kind of, they kind of quit listening. But if you go, did you know that's statistically proven, and you all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, why? Where did you get? The conversation starts. Then you start showing them what does science say about this, and then you can loop it around, right? Like, okay, science says this. Like, what does God say about this? Like, let's talk about real purity. Let's talk about this. And it's really neat on how you can connect science with God, right? I know a lot of people like to split up the two, but I'm telling you, they can work hand in hand, especially when you're talking about something so difficult. So it creates sexual aggression in the behavior in the viewer. So those kind of all go together. So now if we say create sexual aggression in the viewer, and then go back up and say the average age of first exposure is 10 years old. We're having 10-year-olds that are viewing very aggressive pornography, and then we wonder why when they're 16 or they're 17 or 18, they have very unhealthy relationships with people. Perhaps they have dating issues. Perhaps they're in trouble with law enforcement. But this is what's happening, is because we have to start talking about it. We have to have those open communications.
So, the next myth. I know we have a great slideshow here. The next myth is viewing pornography together will strengthen a marriage. And again, this comes from experience of us dealing with families that are having problems. And believe it or not, this is a pretty popular myth within the church even. Usually what this dynamic looks like is the husband either has been caught viewing porn, or thinks it's a good idea to introduce this problem that he's struggling with to his wife. I'm going to say more often than not, it's that the husband is caught. And, the dynamic of porn within a marriage is, more often than not, it makes the wife feel very inadequate. It makes her feel unloved. It makes her feel like she'll never be good enough to please her husband, rouse her husband. That's a really tough thing for a wife. And so what we'll see is that she'll compromise and think, this is a good idea. This is a way to save my marriage. This is a way to strengthen things. Maybe I can get him back. I can get him back into me and away from the computer or his iPhone. And so what we're about to read here, with this myth being busted, is a gentleman named Dr. Kirk Smith. He's a psychologist. He runs a website called Guy Stuff. And so basically it's a website of issues that guys struggle with. And so this is according to him, couples that he treats and marriages that he treats. Marriages that introduce pornography are 2 times more likely to divorce. I'm not sure exactly what the divorce rate in America is without involving pornography. I know at one point it was 50% of marriages in divorce. And so with introducing porn into the marriage, you're 2 times more likely. That's bad odds. That was according to the American Sociological Association in 2016. And so what this Dr. Kurt Smith said is he often sees 2 scenarios of marriages that bring pornography in. The first scenario is going to be that the wife agrees to it and thinks it's a good idea, and she'll do anything to save her marriage. And the heart of our wives, gentlemen, the heart of our wives is to do whatever it takes to save the marriage. So a lot of times men, to be honest, will exploit that by trying to corrupt whatever purity may be with the wife and bring her into this. So the wife views porn with the husband in this scenario, ends up feeling insecure, just as she did before this, resentful, and it usually will lead to a complete withdrawal sexually. And so therefore the husband feels justified in his viewing and participation in pornography, and nothing changes. In fact, it becomes worse. Whatever intimacy the couple did share is now completely cut off. The other scenario that this psychologist says he sees in couples he treats is a psychosomatic effect, which is pornography is required for the arousal of both partners. And so now there's no intimacy between these two partners, between husband and wife, that does not have pornography involved in it. And pornography is required for both partners to be able to be intimate together. And again, this is something that spirals out of control. It's not manageable. It's not pure. It's not healthy. And so this myth of maybe if we do this together, it'll save our marriage. It'll make our marriage stronger. That's absolutely false. It's busted. Busted. So this next myth, pornography is a secular problem, not a church problem. I was really proud of that graphic, by the way. So these are some pretty sobering statistics here. According to the Barna Group and Covenant Eyes, which is basically a resource to help with pornography, 68% of church-going men view pornography regularly. 68%. Regularly was defined in these two surveys as 1 time a week or more. And so if we really know anything about pornography addiction, it's more often than 1 time a week. But let's just be, let's give it a modest estimate and say at least 1 time a week. 68% of church-going men. 50% of pastors view pornography regularly. 59% of pastors say men seek help for pornography use. I mean, again, this is not a fun subject to talk about, but this is something that we need to talk about within these walls. As Reverend Don said, the worst thing we can do in any environment like this is to say nothing and to do nothing. This is a problem that brings about other exploitation and abuse problems. If we can address this and open up conversations and honestly talk about this within our church walls without feeling embarrassed or ashamed, there is so much light is going to come to this subject, so much healing is going to come to this subject, and that's what we need. 87% of Christian women have viewed pornography. 87% of Christian women have viewed pornography. 57% of pastors say porn addiction is the most damaging issue to their congregation. But let's be real, so 57% say it's the most damaging issue in their congregation, and that's because no one will talk about it. Because the pastor is afraid to get up and talk about it. He's afraid how the congregation is going to react. And the thing is, when we leave church on Sunday and we go out to eat, all these issues in the world and in our home and in our family are all going on, and everybody's talking about it. But it's funny how when we walk into the church, we think we can only talk about certain things and we can't talk about other things. And so 57% of pastors say pornography addiction is the most damaging issue to their congregation. 69% of pastors say porn has adversely affected their church. And yet only 7% of churches have a program to help people struggling with pornography. I can tell you at Dominion, we looked into establishing a program, and it is a very, very detailed thing. And that's something that men's ministry is figuring out how to make happen because it's necessary. But only 7% of churches have an actual helping program for men that are brave enough to come forward and say that they're having a struggle with this. And so back to this myth. Pornography is a secular problem, not a church problem. This last statistic, Pornhub sees the highest volume of traffic on Sundays. That was according to Pornhub's 2017 year in review website. Pornhub was very proud of that. Just a quick 10-second history of Pornhub. If you're not familiar, they are the largest porn website in the world. They are a multi-billion-dollar annually business, hosting videos. And so they see the highest volume of traffic on Sundays. That's a really interesting, and they didn't have the breakdown, but I've read it before, and usually it's between 2 and 4 p.m. is the highest volume of traffic on Sundays, between 2 and 4 p.m. That's a staggering statistic, because you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know, what do we do on Sundays? We're in church. What happens after we get out of church? We go eat, and then we go home. And that's the highest traffic, between 2 and 4 p.m. This is a very, very real and present problem within our walls, that we just have to be embarrassed, be uncomfortable, let ourselves feel awkward, and to begin the conversation and talk about it. And we just need to continue to have these conversations. That awkwardness will pass. That feeling strange about it will pass. It's a societal issue, because society is made up of families, of communities. Churches are made up of individuals, which make up families, which make up communities, which makes up society. This is something that we have to talk about. This is it's something we have to talk about. I'll leave it at that. Sometimes I get nervous, excuse me.
And so this is a weird lane that we've obviously found ourselves in ministry. So Kirk and I didn't step into ministry with this in mind. We're missionaries. We've done a lot of international mission work, as you read in our bio. And we've traveled to Asia and to Africa and to Central America, and we love missions. Missions is the heart of who we are. We found our calling on the missions field, and our first mission trip was in 2011, and we kind of went because we're good people, right? We love people, and we love to reach people. And so when our church invited us to go on a mission trip to Central America, we thought, well, what the heck? We'll go, and because we're good Christians, and we're going to go and see what this is about. And we went, and God just wrecked our hearts for missions. I remember coming back from that mission trip and sitting in my home and kind of visualizing a price tag on everything in my home, thinking, okay, so if we sold everything, okay, this room, we could probably get this much money, okay, and then the bed. I just went through every room in my home thinking, okay, we're gonna sell everything, and we're gonna leave, and we're gonna just go wherever God calls us to go. And I didn't say anything to my husband, because that would have been a really awkward conversation, like, hey, hun, what if we sold everything and we just moved to a foreign country? So for a whole year, I prayed, Jesus, you've got to talk to my husband, because if I bring it up, he's going to think I'm crazy. But if you tell him, then it'll be his idea, right? Women, we love that. And so for a whole year, I just was praying. I'm like, all right, Lord, I haven't really, we've talked about the mission trip, and we were like, how did you like it? And those conversations. Well, the next year rolled around, and we got invited to go back. And so we go back again, and we come back. And it was so amazing on how Kirk said, I think we're called into missions. That's a great idea. Where did that come from? And so God is just so faithful with your prayers. And so then we found ourselves just now preparing. So that was 2012. We kind of put a timeline. We got connected with a really great sending organization called Go To Nations, and they're out of Jacksonville, Florida. We went through a lot of training and a lot of equipping, and how to partnership raise, and how to prepare yourself for the field. And they have a really great, what's it called? A equipping track. So you start here and you finish X amount of weeks and you go here, because they want you to be successful out on the field. So we're doing it. And so then in 2015, we sold everything. We only had about, about 10 or 11 tubs full of personal things that you don't sell. And I was going to store that in my brother's garage. And we were leaving to Thailand. We were going to live in Thailand for 2 years. And that was our heart of where we felt the Lord was calling us to go. So we went to Central America, and we spent almost 3 months just wrapping up kind of the work that we had done there for many years. We came home. We were going to be there for the holidays and hug everybody. And we had tickets to leave in January of 2016. And that is what we were going to do. We were nervous. We were excited. But unfortunately, we have 3 children, and our middle son, prior to all of this going on, we had found him struggling with pornography. He was 12 at the time. And we didn't know what to say. I don't know, parents in here, if you were given a manual of how to be a parent and turn to page 72 on how to talk to your child about pornography. We didn't have that manual. We didn't know what to say. So we took like the really weird religious aspect to it of, what does Jesus say about purity? And because we didn't know. We didn't know how to have those awkward conversations. And there was crying, and there was him promising he was never going to view it again. But we shamed him. And we didn't know, and we didn't mean to, but we just didn't, we weren't equipped as parents to talk to our son. So did the viewing stop on his part? It didn't. All he did was hide it more and view it more. And we didn't know this was going on until, a month before we left, he had assaulted a young girl. And we were in this position of going, okay, either we can sweep this under the rug, right? Pastor Don said, we have a good ability of putting on that good face and just pretending like everything's okay, or he needs to be held accountable. And this was probably the hardest thing that we ever did as parents, is when you take your 14-year-old child into the police station and you have him confess what he did. And this is where our lane of new ministry began. It began out of a really broken place of saying, we never want to see another parent standing in court like we were. And we never want to see another 14-year-old boy standing in court like our son was. And it was very broke. We were very broke. We now were homeless, right? We sold our home. We sold everything. We sold all of our cars. We sold all of our stuff. We had no money because the money allocated was for our missions overseas. We found ourselves just sitting there going, God, did we hear you wrong? What are we truly supposed to do? And in that moment, we were supposed to walk this restoration path with our son. He had to go through very extensive counseling. He had to go through very extensive therapy. Proud to say he's doing great. He's 18 years old now. We have a wonderful relationship with him built on openness of talking about issues, right? Because if we can't help our own family, then that gives us, we shouldn't be helping other families. And so a lot of people say, how are you qualified to talk about this? Oftentimes our brokenness qualifies us to talk about subjects. And this is where we found ourselves. We found ourselves saying, how did he get here? This wasn't something that was taught in our home, right? I think you can teach stealing to your children because that's what you do. You can teach lying to your children because that's what you do. Your children can model their actions after you. But we didn't watch any type of movie that had anything. So we were sitting there going, where did this come from? And we asked him, what happened? What led you to this point? And pornography was that root cause. And because we didn't, and I can't say, it's our fault, we just weren't equipped to talk to our son and to get him the kind of help and to have those open conversations. So he continued viewing it, and then guess what happened? He acted on what he viewed. And we find that very often, right? What we've been talking about today about the statistics of actively viewing pornography makes you 6 times more likely to rape. It makes you more aggressive. It develops aggressive behavior in you. And then here we see in our own son that actively viewing pornography caused him to do something that is so much out of his character of who God had designed him to be. And that's where our heart came in, is how can we reach more men, right? Because our heart is about restoration, and we love reaching women, and we love going and speaking to women, but how can we reach the men who are struggling silently with this issue, and they think they have a handle on it, and they think they know what they're doing, and I promise I'll quit. But if they don't walk through the right steps of getting healing and walking through the right steps of their marriage healing or their family unit healing or healing relationships with their children, then the addiction and the addictive personality will continue, and it could change from different addiction to different addiction. And so our heart is really just to come and to be with parents and say, have you had these conversations? And most of the time parents are like, no, they're only 13, you know. Really? Because my daughter sees kids on the school bus watching pornography. So if we're not going to talk to them about it, guess who is? Google is going to talk to them about it. Online, they're gaming online and they're talking to people online. Those kids are talking about it. The school bus is talking about it. The hallway in your school, kid's school. And we can say, well, but I homeschool my children. I have a lot of people that say that. I homeschool my children. But your kids at some point are going to be around other kids. And guess what's going to happen? Oh my gosh, did you see this? Oh my gosh, can you believe? And then all of a sudden, your kid accidentally has been exposed to pornography. But then what happens in your kid's brain is they go, well, was that really true? And guess what they start doing? They start doing their own research. And they find these websites and they start viewing things on their own. But if you've already, so like I had a friend say, how young is too young? My child is only 7. There's some really great resources. There's a book called Good Picture, Bad Picture. And it's a really great book that younger, you can show your younger children. And then it's just having this environment and this atmosphere in your home of open communication, of just talking about using real words and using real stories to talk with our children, to engage with our children. And so that is what got us into this ministry. It's not glamorous by any means. It's not... we've actually had people walk up to us in church settings and they're like, oh my gosh, hi, what kind of ministry do you guys do? And we're like, oh, what we do, we talk to people about pornography, and they'll go, okay. And they just walk the other way and we're like, nice talking to you, thank you, here's our card, because people don't want to talk about it. But what we found is like, I will talk about it anywhere. I was on the phone with my mom at CVS the other day, and she's like, oh, what are you doing this weekend? And I have a volume level issue sometimes, and so I talk loud, even though a phone's supposed to be an amplifier of voices, but apparently I don't understand that. Yeah, it is true. And so I'm looking for something, and she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, we're going to this seminar this weekend, and we're talking, and she's like, oh, what are you doing? And I said, oh, we're talking about pornography, and Mom, did you? And all of a sudden I glanced over, and there's this lady like, looking at me, putting this stuff in her bag, and I'm like, hi, how are you? And she's all, and I'm like, anyways, so a lady was listening to me talk about porn, Mom, anyways, and I'm just walking, but the thing is I think what it is, I'm not talking about it in a vile way, and I'm not being obnoxious about it, but what it is that we need to talk about it. And I think the more we start talking about it, now my kids will say, oh, Mom, hey, I was watching this one thing, and they were talking about pornography about something. I'm like, oh, what was that? And then we'll have a 5 or 7 minute conversation about it. And guess what? It's done. We answered a question, or they said, Mom, what was that you were talking about that one time? And they'll recap it. You want to know why they wanted to recap? Because they're going to tell it to somebody. They want the right information, and they sit in a friend group and they go, hey, did you know? And I want my kids to have the right did you know, because I want them to equip their friend group in order to have a healthy relationships with their partners as they get older. So the last one, I can keep talking all day. The last one is, the myth is, porn is just porn. Like, is it even that big of a deal? And I've literally heard it come out of somebody's mouth. It's not even that big of a deal. I think you guys are just making up a ministry lane. I said, well, trust me, I would not be doing this. I'd be saving puppies, or I don't know, something a lot more joyful than doing what we do. So we did not make up a ministry lane to talk to churches about pornography. So pornography has a direct link to sex trafficking. And Kirk will show you here in a minute of an escalation dynamic to kind of show you real quick. Pornography is filmed prostitution. And a lot of people say, oh no, the woman is making money in pornography, so she's a willing participant. Okay, but usually when we talk about prostitution, there is the woman, usually I'll say women, there's men in pornography as well, but there's a buyer, and there's a person selling the woman in prostitution, and then there's the woman being exploited. The only difference with pornography is that there's a camera. That's it. There's a person making money off of it, there's a buyer, and there's a woman being exploited. The only difference is that there's a camera. It's filmed prostitution, period. Mirror neurons. So what happens is that we see something, we do it, right? We found that with our own son. He saw something, he did it. This happens across the board. Escalating behaviors. So what happens is you start out kind of at this low level, and through years of viewing or through months of viewing, your behaviors change. One thing I wanted to tell you when I was speaking a little bit about Playboy, and this is what was kind of interesting that I had found, because this is where people say, whatever, Mike, I've been looking at Playboy since I was 10 and I'm fine. But times have changed when it comes to pornography. So Playboy used to be a monthly magazine that got sent. Now in 2019, it's only quarterly. Prior to the internet, Playboy sold 5 million copies a month. 5 million copies. Now they only sell several thousands an issue. And the reason why is because pornography is here. It's right here. I can search whatever I want. I can look at whatever I want whenever I want. I don't need to wait for a magazine to come in the mail. I can interact with someone on the internet. I can watch actions happen on the internet. I'm surprised Playboy is even really around anymore, but that's what people, it didn't do anything to me. I'm fine. So Kirk is going to walk you through the escalation dynamic so you can actually see that pornography is directly linked to sex trafficking.
I was just looking at my watch to see the time. I wasn't rushing you.
It's okay. I know.
So what we've discovered in our lane of ministry, going to the street, doing outreaches to prostituted women, we often see buyers or Johns, customers, and we say, or consumers, whichever word sounds better to you. And we often say, how did this person get from point A to point B? You know, who wakes up in the morning and just says, I think I'll go buy somebody for their services. You know, I'll buy a person and pay this much and pick them up on the street. So we really have put some work into studying this. This escalation dynamic comes partially from an organization that we work with called Love People Not Pixels. Great resources about pornography and the link between pornography and human trafficking, prostitution. And so most of the time when we're younger, our sexual awakening, our sexual information, our first exposure is to some kind of softcore porn. Now, back in the day, revealing our age here, that was Skinamax, or one of those type of shows, Showtime after 11 or whatever the deal was. Nowadays, it's probably just about any cologne or perfume commercial that comes on TV. But so it starts out with a softcore pornography exposure. And that awakens an arousal, that awakens a curiosity that brings the viewer into hardcore pornography. That is a process of, it alienates relationships because the mirror neuron, the monkey see, monkey do thing, this is all tied to our sexuality and all tied to our arousal. And so what we see with that is it alienates relationships because now what I've seen and fantasized about, I can't bring to my partner or my significant other because it's pretty extreme. And so I have to find some kind of way to have an outlet with that mirror neuron pathway, that monkey see, monkey do. And here we go into webcam or voyeur porn, which is, feels awkward saying that, but that's a way to interact with a person over the computer. that webcam. You can tell that person do this and they'll do it, and you pay with your credit card and how that works. Well, that's not a real live person that can touch you that you can touch. And that's just, after a while, that doesn't become enough either. And so now we see an escalation into going into strip clubs. That's, lap dances, that's VIP rooms, that's all of these things that's a real live person. But again, that's not really satisfying. That's not enough. That's not enough to act out all of this that this consumer has been viewing. And so there we move into massage or modeling studios. In other words, like a spa. And so that's human trafficking. That's women who have been trafficked in. Most of the time, they're Asian brothels, spas. And so you are now playing a participating role in human trafficking by paying for sexual services from someone who is being exploited. And again, that's not quite the same as picking up a prostituted woman on the street and taking her back to her hotel room or your hotel room and acting out all of this bizarre fantasy that you've been fantasizing and thinking about. And so the point from step one into buying a person and receiving sexual services from them, it is an escalation, and it is pornography rooted. And so that's what we want to talk about. That's the importance of this, is to educate ourselves and to educate others. It's pretty rare for someone just to go from point A to point Z. They usually have this in between. And so if you see this little graphic on the bottom right-hand corner, it says 1 in 20 U.S. men have bought sex online. 1 in 20. And then it says in Houston, this figure jumps to 1 in 5. 1 in 5 men in Houston have bought sex online. It's a pretty scary dynamic. Scary, and that's our area. This is Humble. We're in the Seabrook area. I mean, all of this is within a 30-minute, 40-minute drive to Houston. There's a tract called, a prostitution tract called Bissonnette Street. It's one of the largest in the nation. It's the largest in Houston. And it is literally like driving through a drive-through. You can drive up and down this 3-mile strip on either side of the road, and you can have your variety of whatever you choose. And there's police officers driving around. There's, all kinds of stuff going on, and it happens in plain sight. Everybody knows it's going on, but the problem is so large and so huge and so out of control, nobody can do anything about it. And so we've been involved with a lot of outreaches on Bissonnette. But as Stephanie said, where our heart is is to stop this demand side. Stephanie talked when she opened about supply and demand. There's a supply of prostituted women because there's a demand for prostituted women. And so where does the first step of that come from? It's rooted in this pornography, and that is why we want to have these conversations. And so we're trying not to step on Valerie's toes, because she's going to get up and present about human trafficking. But I think this is a nice segue to bring you up. So, Reverend Don. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. It begins, you say, well, when is that temptation ever going to be done with in a man's life? When you go to heaven. So every day we deal with temptation. And the answer is found in your relationship, your daily, active relationship with God, your devotional life, you're crying out to Him, because there is hope. We can overcome these things. You and I can help others overcome these things, but it's rooted. The answer is rooted. The psalmist says, I will not allow my eyes to look upon anything evil. That's where it starts. Paul says to flee the very appearance of evil. Not to flee evil, but to flee the very appearance of. This is the battleground. I make it my prayer just about every single day. Lord, I want to treat men and women in my life the way you treat them. Period. That's it. I make it my prayer to do that. But it's a battle, and we have to do that. I want you to use these guys. Each one of these speakers can come and bring training. I would like to see Valerie and Kirk and Stephanie in every single one of our youth groups across our district. I wish I could require it. To be an Assembly of God church, you are required to have this training in your groups. But I can't do that because you would sue me. Or you would just leave the assemblies. Well, that's an idea. Accountability. The issues of grooming. These guys have experience in the churches they attend to help parents know when their child is being groomed to be exploited. And who does it happen to? It almost happens to about every single one of our kids. The open door to be exploited. These guys can help you learn to converse about that and to train your church and your workers on that. But to have the conversation, they can have conversation. To train parents, how do you even talk about this stuff? It's so awkward. Bring them in and have a parent roundtable and put some issues on the table and learn how to do it. That's where it starts. That's where it starts. So thank you so much, Kirk and Stephanie. Let's give them another hand.